Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? You picked the source material, and this time we're exploring the ideas of Saadi of Shiraz.
Oh, a fascinating choice. I'm eager to see what we discover.
We've got 50 audio files from Marifat, which features these Iranian philosophers, Dr. Dinani and Dr. Larijani, discussing Saadi. Lots to unpack.
A treasure trove of wisdom, it sounds like.
Definitely. But before we get too far, a quick heads up for our listeners. These are translated conversations.
Yeah, yes.
So we're bound to run into spots where things might get a little lost in translation. Apologies in advance for any discrepancies.
That's understandable. I'm sure Saadi's brilliance will still shine through.
Absolutely. Now, what really struck me as I was going through these recordings was how much they focused on Saadi's ideas about self-knowledge.
Ah, interesting.
Like, do we really know ourselves, or are we just a collection of the roles we play for different people?
Yes. That's a theme that runs deep in Saadi's work. It reminds me of that story from the Gulistan, the one with the holy man who gets mistaken for a Jew.
Oh, yeah. That one always sticks with me. This passerby encounters this holy man, but assumes he's Jewish. And, well, you know the rest. It's a powerful story.
It really highlights how easily we can misjudge people based on appearances. But what's even more fascinating is how the holy man responds. Instead of getting angry or retaliating, he actually offers the attacker a gift, his own shirt.
It's such a powerful moment. It makes you think, what kind of inner strength allows someone to react with such grace in the face of that kind of prejudice?
Well, that's where Saadi's wisdom comes in. The holy man explains his actions by saying, I'm grateful for this encounter, you see, because it shows me how others perceive me, and it reminds me that I'm not defined by those perceptions.
It's easy to say you are not what others think you are, but Saadi seems to be pointing to something much deeper here.
Absolutely. He's highlighting the difference between who we are on the inside and how the world sees us, and that gap exists for everyone.
That resonates. It's like we're always trying to figure out how to reconcile who we are with how other people see us. So should we just ignore how people perceive us?
Well, that's where Dr. Dinani's perspective comes in. He argues that we can't simply ignore societal roles or perceptions. We all wear masks. A shopkeeper wears the mask of a shopkeeper. A doctor wears the mask of a doctor. It's part of how society functions.
So it's like everyone is playing a part in this giant play we call life.
Yes. Dr. Larijani even compares the world to a grand cinema where we're all actors, putting on costumes and playing our parts.
But wouldn't that make it almost impossible to know our true selves?
And that's the million-dollar question. Saadi isn't saying we should run away from the world or refuse to play our parts. He's urging us to understand ourselves better, our core values, and what really matters to us, so we can navigate those roles with authenticity.
Easier said than done, right? It's one thing to say, know thyself, but how do we actually get there?
The scholars in these recordings discuss two types of knowledge, ilm al-husuli and ilm al-huduri.
Okay, those terms sound a bit intimidating.
They are, a little. Ilm al-husuli is acquired knowledge. Basically, the kind of knowledge you get through observation or study, but they argue we can't know ourselves just through that. It's like trying to understand a flower by looking at it. You miss the scent, the texture.
Right, I see where you're going with this.
To really know the flower, you have to experience it. And that's where ilm al-huduri comes in knowledge by presence. It's about experiencing your true nature directly.
Like a kind of internal awareness.
Exactly. Saadi's suggesting we go beyond just thinking about ourselves, but actually experiencing our essence.
That sounds, well, pretty profound. Honestly, I struggle with quieting my mind enough for any deep introspection.
That's a common challenge. But Dr. Dinani offers a really interesting perspective on this. He says one of the most powerful tools for cultivating this awareness is language.
Language. That's unexpected. What do words have to do with self-discovery?
The scholars argue that language shapes our thoughts, our perceptions, how we see ourselves, and ultimately our reality. They even point to a detail in Saadi's poetry where he calls himself my own cupbearer.
My own cupbearer, huh? I don't quite follow.
By saying that, he suggests he isn't relying on anything external for his happiness. He's the source of his own joy.
I see. He's not waiting for someone else to fill his cup. He's taking responsibility for his own well-being.
Exactly. And the scholars suggest we can apply this principle in our lives. It starts with paying attention to the language we use.
Instead of saying, I'm looking for happiness, we might say, the potential for happiness is already within me. Something like that.
Precisely. It's about shifting from a place of lack to a place of abundance, about recognizing that the potential for fulfillment already resides within.
I like that. It's like becoming our own internal cheerleader, encouraging ourselves to tap into our own wellspring of wisdom and joy.
Exactly. But let's be real, it's not always easy to maintain that positive self-talk, especially with the constant barrage of information and distractions we face every day.
It does feel like trying to meditate in the middle of a hurricane sometimes.
Yeah.
So how do we resist that pull, that constant craving for more, more, more?
They offer this concept of discernment. It's about being able to tell the difference between what truly nourishes your soul and what's just noise.
Oh, I like that. Like being more mindful about what we choose to consume. So instead of endless scrolling or binging on whatever's trending, we ask ourselves, is this feeding my soul or is it just a distraction?
You got it. It's about being intentional with our time and energy and recognizing that we can't process everything. But even if we get better at choosing what we consume, finding time for silence and contemplation in a world that's always demanding our attention, that's a different beast altogether.
Yeah.
You're right, it is. It's a challenge we all face. These scholars remind us, though, that silence doesn't have to mean a place without any sound at all.
Right, right.
It's more about creating space for some inner peace, that quiet place inside. They suggest just weaving little bits of silence into our daily routines.
So even a few minutes here and there can make a difference.
Even a few minutes can make a big difference. And it actually gets easier with practice.
Oh, like working a muscle.
Exactly. The more we use those stillness muscles, the stronger they get.
I can get behind that. But what about those times, when your mind just won't shut up? What if I try to be silent and it's just thoughts swirling around?
That's totally normal, don't worry. It's not about trying to force those thoughts out.
Okay, good.
Just gently redirect your attention back to your breath, if that helps. Just whenever you notice your mind wandering off.
Right, right. Focus on the breath.
Remember, it's a practice, not a test you have to pass.
Good point. Sometimes I forget to be kind to myself in that process. One thing I've been wondering about with Saadi's work is all this talk about connecting with something bigger than ourselves, something divine. To be honest, I'm not really a religious person. Can I still tap into that without, subscribing to a whole belief system?
Absolutely. Connecting with the divine doesn't have to mean religious dogma or rituals.
Okay, good to know.
It's about nurturing a relationship with what you find sacred.
So finding your own path to that connection.
Exactly. And there are so many paths you could take. Traditional religious practices, connecting with nature. You could find it through art, through music, even just quiet contemplation on your own.
Okay. As long as it feels right for you.
As long as it speaks to your heart.
I have to say, sometimes the whole spiritual growth thing feels a bit overwhelming. Like, where do you even start?
I understand.
What if I'm doing it wrong?
It's a common
Yeah.
feeling. But remember, there's no one right way to do this.
Right.
It's about finding what works for you, what speaks to you, what makes you feel more connected.
So it's more about the journey than the destination.
Exactly. It's a journey of discovery, and
Yeah.
you don't have to have all the answers right away.
Good. Less pressure.
It does feel like there's this expectation sometimes that you need to be perfectly enlightened, you know?
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing from these scholars is that it's much more gentle, much more approachable than that.
Absolutely. They emphasize that this is a lifelong process. You're going to stumble. You're going to make mistakes.
Yeah, for sure.
It's okay to course correct along the way. The most important thing is just to keep that curiosity alive. Keep searching and trust the journey you're on.
I love that. What a great reminder. Speaking of reminders, I'm wondering about those key takeaways, from Saadi's work. What are those big ideas we should hold on to as we go on this journey of self-discovery and growth?
Well, they emphasize a few things. One of the big ones is Saadi's focus on how everything is interconnected.
Interconnected.
He reminds us that we aren't just these isolated individuals.
Right.
We're all threads in this big, beautiful tapestry of life.
So we're all connected. Our actions have an impact. We're in it together. Yes. And realizing that can be comforting, but also make us feel more responsible. It can help us feel connected to everything around us. But it can also inspire us to act with more kindness and compassion.
That makes sense. It's like a shift from thinking about what we lack to thinking about abundance, cooperation instead of competition.
Exactly. And the scholars believe that this shift in perspective, this change in how we see things, is essential if we want to create a world that is more fair, more compassionate, more sustainable.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah.
But how do we even start to make that shift? It seems like we're constantly told the opposite, that we need to look out for ourselves first.
It's true, our culture often pushes those ideas. But the scholars argue that we don't have to buy into that story.
Okay.
We can choose to embrace a different one, one that emphasizes connection, compassion, and recognizing the worth and dignity of every single being.
So we become aware of the stories we're telling ourselves and
Right.
choose to believe in a more empowering, more positive narrative.
You got it. And choosing to believe that can have a ripple effect. It influences not just our lives, but the world around us too.
Wow, that's amazing. And, it makes me think about Saadi's skill as a storyteller. He was so good at conveying these profound truths in such an engaging way.
Absolutely. They talk about how storytelling is such a powerful tool for sharing wisdom and creating real change.
Yeah.
Stories have this incredible ability to go beyond our logical minds, you know? They speak directly to our hearts.
It's like they plant these little seeds of wisdom that can grow into something amazing over time.
Exactly. And the scholars highlight that we can all learn from Saadi's approach to storytelling, not just by enjoying the stories he told, but by bringing storytelling into our own lives.
Sharing our own story.
It's a way to connect with other people, share what we've experienced, and pass on the wisdom we've learned.
I love that. But full disclosure, storytelling isn't really my forte. Any tips for those of us who struggle with that?
Start simple. Think about your own experiences. Those moments that shaped who you are, taught you something valuable.
Things that touched our hearts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everyone has a story to tell, and when we share their stories, we build connection, empathy, and understanding.
So it's not about trying to be a literary genius.
Nope.
It's being genuine, sharing our truth, and letting the story unfold naturally.
That's exactly it. And remember, those imperfections, those raw edges, that's what makes stories so powerful.
Right. It's the real stuff that connects us. All these insights are so valuable. Before we move on, though, I want to come back to this idea of self-knowledge.
Yes.
It feels so foundational to everything else we've discussed.
It is.
The connection, the compassion, the gratitude.
Yes.
But it also feels like the hardest part.
It's true. Self-knowledge is a lifelong journey. It takes work, reflection, and honesty. Sometimes brutal honesty.
Right.
Because it also means confronting the parts of ourselves that we don't like so much.
It's not just about focusing on the good stuff, then.
Exactly. The scholars emphasize how important that shadow work is if we want to grow and change.
Shadow work, huh? Can you remind me what that is again?
Our shadow side is made up of those things we repress, the things we deny or judge about ourselves.
The parts we try to hide away.
Exactly. And the problem is, hiding them doesn't make them go away.
Right.
They often come out in unhealthy ways, maybe sabotaging our relationships or our self-esteem.
So with shadow work, we bring those hidden parts into the light.
Yes. You become aware of them so you can integrate them, become more whole.
Okay, I get it. But it still sounds a little scary.
It can be.
Does Saadi offer any guidance for how to do that?
The scholars point to his emphasis on self-reflection, honesty, and seeking truth. You know, Saadi was a master at observing human nature, the good and the bad.
He wasn't afraid to look at the dark side.
Nope. And he wasn't afraid to show it in his writing either.
So he was brave enough to look inward, even when it was uncomfortable.
Oh, he was. And they believe his example can inspire us to do the same.
I like that. But how do we actually do this shadow work? Where do we even begin?
Start with familiar practices. Journaling, meditation.
Right.
They help create a space for reflection, make you more aware of your thoughts, emotions, behaviors.
So you hit the pause button and observe yourself.
Exactly. And remember, approach it with kindness, curiosity.
Right.
It's not about beating yourself up. It's about understanding yourself better so you can move through the world with more awareness.
This is really powerful stuff. It highlights how much of Saadi's wisdom depends on that inner transformation. It's not just about changing what we do, but about cultivating what's in our hearts.
Yes, you're exactly right. That's precisely what Dr. Dinani emphasizes when he discusses the concept of Jadon Talabi.
Okay, say that in.
Jadon Talabi. It means the pursuit of eternity or the longing for immortality.
Wow, heavy stuff. I'm curious, how does that relate to, self-knowledge and societal roles?
Dr. Dinani argues that this longing for something beyond, something bigger than our physical existence, that's part of what makes us human.
Okay.
It's what drives us to search for meaning, for purpose, to connect with something greater than ourselves.
Right. So it's not about living forever literally, but about connecting to something timeless.
Exactly. And he says it's through that search for the eternal, that yearning for something more, that we start to see the world in a new way. We recognize how interconnected everything is.
It reminds me of Saadi's idea of finding the divine in everything, even the ordinary, even the struggles.
You've got it. It shows how multi-layered Saadi's wisdom is. He brings together philosophy, spirituality, and practical advice, all woven together to guide us toward a meaningful life,
Like a roadmap for self-discovery and growth.
leading us to recognize that we're already whole and connected to that divine spark within each of us.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It does make you realize that this journey isn't one you have to take alone.
It isn't. We're all in this together. We're here to support and inspire each other along the way.
I'm so inspired after exploring Saadi's work. It's amazing how relevant his ideas still are.
They truly are timeless. It speaks to how deeply he understood human nature.
Like he tapped into some universal truth about what it means to be human.
Precisely. And the scholars really emphasize that this exploration, this search for the divine, doesn't have to mean rigid rules or rituals.
Right.
It's about cultivating your own personal connection with what you consider sacred.
It's about finding that connection that's unique to you.
Yes. And they remind us that there are so many ways to do that. Traditional religious practices, connecting with nature, finding it in art, music, or just quiet contemplation.
So many paths.
So long as it speaks to your heart.
So it's about trusting your own journey and trusting that you're being guided in the right direction.
Exactly. They emphasize approaching it with an open mind, being open to the unknown, and trusting that you're being supported every step of the way.
That's really reassuring because, to be honest, all this can feel a little overwhelming. Like, where do you even begin? What if you're doing it wrong?
Those are natural feelings. But remember, there's no one right way to do this. It's about finding what works for you, what speaks to you, what helps you feel more connected to that sense of the divine.
So it's about trying things out, exploring different paths, and seeing what feels right.
It's about discovery. There's no need to rush or put pressure on yourself.
Good, because sometimes it feels like you're supposed to have it all figured out.
Yeah.
Be this perfectly enlightened person.
Right.
But what I'm hearing is that it's much more gentle, much more forgiving.
It is. It's a lifelong journey, and it's okay to stumble, to make mistakes, to change course along the way.
That takes a lot of the pressure off. What matters most is to keep that curiosity alive, keep searching, and trust the process.
Exactly.
That's such a beautiful reminder. While we're on the topic of reminders, what are some of the key takeaways that the scholars highlight from Saadi's work? What are those nuggets of wisdom that we can carry with us on this journey?
There are a few that come up again and again. One of the most important is this emphasis on how everything is interconnected. He reminds us that we aren't these isolated individuals.
Right.
We're threads in this big, beautiful tapestry of life.
So we're all connected, our actions matter, we're in this together.
Exactly. And that awareness can be both comforting and a call to action. It can make us feel connected to everything around us, but it can also inspire us to act with more compassion and kindness.
That makes so much sense. It's like shifting from a mindset of scarcity and competition to one of abundance and cooperation.
Exactly. And they believe that shift in perspective is essential for creating a more just, compassionate, and sustainable world.
That's a really powerful idea. But how do we even begin to make that shift? It feels like we're constantly being told the opposite, that we need to look out for ourselves first, that resources are scarce, that it's a dog-eat-dog world.
It's true, our culture often pushes those ideas, but the scholars argue that we don't have to buy into that story. We can choose to embrace a different one, a story that emphasizes interconnectedness, compassion, and the inherent worth and dignity of every being.
So we become more aware of the stories we're telling ourselves and choose to believe in a more positive and empowering narrative.
Yes. And making that choice, believing in that story, can have a ripple effect. It not only influences our lives, but it influences the world around us, too.
That's so inspiring. And speaking of stories, it reminds me of Saadi's incredible skill as a storyteller. His works are full of vivid anecdotes and parables that convey these profound truths in such an engaging and memorable way.
Absolutely. The scholars point to Saadi's mastery of storytelling as a powerful tool for transmitting wisdom and inspiring transformation. They explain that stories have this unique ability to bypass our rational minds and speak directly to our hearts.
It's like they sneak in under the radar and plant these little seeds of wisdom that can blossom into something amazing over time.
Precisely. And the scholars emphasize that we can all learn from Saadi's approach to storytelling, not just by appreciating the stories he shared, but by incorporating storytelling into our own lives.
Oh, interesting. So by sharing our own stories.
Yes. It's a way to connect with other people, share our experiences, and pass on the wisdom we've learned.
That's such a great idea. But full disclosure, storytelling isn't exactly my forte. Any tips for those of us who struggle with that?
They suggest starting with your own personal experiences, those moments that have shaped you, taught you valuable lessons, or touched your heart in some way. They believe that everyone has a story to tell and that sharing those stories can be a powerful way to connect with others, build empathy, and inspire understanding.
So it's not about trying to be some literary genius.
No.
It's about being authentic,
Yep.
sharing our truth, and letting the story unfold naturally.
Exactly. And remember, those imperfections, those rough edges, that's what makes stories so compelling. It's the realness that connects us.
That's so true. All of these insights are just incredible. Before we move on, though, I want to circle back to one of Saadi's core themes that we touched on earlier, the importance of self-knowledge. It feels like that's the foundation for everything else we've been discussing, the interconnectedness, the compassion, the gratitude. But it also feels like one of the most challenging parts of this journey.
You're absolutely right. Self-knowledge is a lifelong pursuit, and it takes consistent effort, reflection, and a willingness to confront those aspects of ourselves that might be less than flattering.
So it's not just about focusing on our strengths and positive qualities. It's about being honest with ourselves about our shadows, too.
Precisely. And the scholars emphasize that this shadow work, as it's sometimes called, is essential for growth and transformation. They explain that our shadow side is made up of those aspects of ourselves that we've repressed, denied, or judged as unacceptable.
So those are the parts of ourselves that we've kind of stuffed away in the basement of our psyches, the dark, dusty corners that we try not to look at.
Exactly. And the problem is those repressed aspects don't simply disappear. They often manifest in unhealthy ways, maybe sabotaging our relationships, undermining our self-esteem, or creating patterns of self-destructive behavior.
Okay, that makes sense. So shadow work is about bringing those hidden aspects into the light of awareness so that we can integrate them and become more whole.
Precisely. And the scholars emphasize that this process of integration is key to living a more authentic and fulfilling life.
Okay, I get it. I'm on board. But I have to admit, I'm still feeling a bit hesitant about this whole shadow work thing. Is there anything in Saadi's work that offers guidance or inspiration for how to do that?
The scholars point to Saadi's emphasis on self-reflection, honesty, and the pursuit of truth as essential qualities for engaging in shadow work. They explain that Saadi was a master of observing human nature, both the noble and the ignoble, and he wasn't afraid to confront the darker aspects of himself in his writing.
So he modeled that courage and willingness to look inward, even when it meant facing some uncomfortable truths about ourselves.
Exactly. And the scholars believe that Saadi's example can inspire us to do the same.
Okay, that's encouraging. But I still feel like I need a little more guidance. Like, how do we actually do shadow work? What are the steps involved?
They suggest starting with some simple practices like journaling or meditation. Those practices help us create a space for self-reflection, allowing us to become more aware of our thoughts, our emotions, and our patterns of behavior.
So it's about hitting the pause button, creating space for observation, and then seeing ourselves more clearly, both the light and the shadow.
Exactly. And they emphasize that it's important to approach this process with compassion and curiosity. It's not about judging ourselves or beating ourselves up for our imperfections, but rather about understanding ourselves more deeply so that we can move through the world with greater awareness, kindness, and authenticity.
That makes a lot of sense. But I have to ask, is there anything in Saadi's work that addresses the unique challenges that women face in navigating this journey of self-discovery and spiritual growth? It feels like women, in particular, are often bombarded with messages about how they should look, act, and be in the world, messages that can make it really difficult to connect with their authentic selves.
That's a great question, and one that's especially relevant in our current cultural climate. While Saadi didn't explicitly address the challenges that women face in the 21st century, his work offers timeless insights into the human condition that transcend gender.
So even though the context has changed, his insights can still be helpful for women who are trying to find their own voice and navigate those societal pressures.
Absolutely. The scholars point to Saadi's emphasis on self-knowledge, inner strength, and the pursuit of wisdom as qualities that can empower women of all ages and backgrounds.
Okay, that makes sense. But I'm also wondering, is there anything in Saadi's work that specifically addresses the role of women in society? I mean, he was writing centuries ago in a very different cultural context.
That's true. And while Saadi's writings do reflect the social norms of his time, there are subtle hints and underlying themes that suggest a deeper understanding of women's inherent worth and potential.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Can you give me some examples?
The scholars point to Saadi's depiction of strong, intelligent, and resourceful women in some of his stories. For example, in the Golistan, there's a story about a wise woman who outsmarts a group of bandits. It's a subtle but powerful reminder that women are capable of great strength, courage, and wisdom, even in challenging circumstances.
I love that. It's like he's subverting those traditional stereotypes and showing us that women are capable of so much more than society often gives them credit for.
Exactly. And the scholars emphasize that those subtle messages can be incredibly powerful, especially for women who are seeking inspiration and validation in their own journeys.
That's really resonating with me. But I also have to ask, how do we reconcile those subtle messages with some of the more patriarchal aspects of Saadi's work? I mean, it feels like there's a tension there, a clash between those progressive glimpses and the cultural norms of his time.
That's a valid point, and it's important to acknowledge those tensions. The scholars suggest that we approach Saadi's work with a discerning eye, recognizing that his writings reflect the complexities of his historical and cultural context. They encourage us to engage in dialogue, to question assumptions, and to challenge those aspects of his work that might feel outdated or problematic.
Okay, I appreciate that nuanced perspective. It's about recognizing that even the greatest thinkers are products of their time, and that we can learn from both their wisdom and their limitations.
Exactly. It's a process of discernment, separating the wheat from the chaff, extracting those timeless truths that resonate with us, while also acknowledging the historical and cultural baggage that might be attached.
That makes so much sense. This idea of approaching Saadi's work with a discerning eye actually reminds me of another core theme that runs through these recordings. The concept of balance. It seems like Saadi was a master at navigating those subtle tensions between seemingly opposing forces.
You've hit on a really important point. The scholars spend a significant amount of time unpacking this idea of balance in Saadi's work. They point out that he was a master of holding those paradoxes between the inner and the outer worlds, the individual and the collective, the spiritual and the mundane.
So it's not about choosing one side over the other, but about finding that point of equilibrium where those seemingly opposing forces can coexist and even enhance each other.
Exactly. It's like that ancient symbol of yin and yang, the light and the dark, the masculine and the feminine, all swirling together in perfect harmony.
I love that analogy. It really captures the essence of what we're talking about. But I have to ask, how do we find that balance in our own lives, especially when it feels like the world is constantly pulling us in different directions, demanding that we choose sides?
That's where Saadi's wisdom shines. He doesn't offer us easy answers or simple formulas. Instead, he invites us to engage in this lifelong process of self-discovery, to cultivate those inner qualities that allow us to navigate those complexities with grace, wisdom, and compassion.
So it's less about achieving this fixed state of balance and more about embracing the journey of constantly recalibrating, adjusting, and finding that sweet spot where we feel both grounded and expansive.
You've got it. And the scholars emphasize that this isn't a passive process. It requires conscious effort, intentional choices, and a willingness to step outside of our comfort zones.
That's really making me think about those areas in my own life where I'm feeling out of balance, where I'm leaning too heavily in one direction or the other.
That's a wonderful insight. Perhaps Saadi's wisdom can offer some guidance on how to recalibrate, how to find that sense of equilibrium that allows you to feel more aligned with your true self and your purpose in the world.
This is so insightful. But I have to ask, how does this idea of balance relate to Saadi's concept of societal roles? I mean, how do we balance our authentic selves with the demands and expectations of the roles that we play in the world?
That's a great question, and it goes back to something we touched on earlier, the importance of self-knowledge. The scholars argue that the deeper our understanding of our true selves, our values, our motivations, our aspirations, the easier it becomes to navigate those roles with authenticity and grace.
So it's about knowing ourselves well enough to choose roles that align with our values and then performing those roles in a way that feels authentic and meaningful.
Exactly. And it also involves recognizing that those roles are not our entire identity. Remember Saadi's analogy of the actor on a stage? The role is just a costume, a temporary performance. The true self is the actor beneath the mask.
That's such a helpful reminder. It's like we can step into those roles, play our parts, and then step back out again without losing ourselves in the process.
That's the idea. And the scholars emphasize that this ability to navigate roles with awareness and detachment is a key element of Saadi's wisdom on balancing the inner and the outer worlds.
Okay, that's starting to make sense. But it also brings up another challenge. How do we deal with those times when our roles feel misaligned with our true selves? What if we're stuck in a job that feels soul-crushing, or a relationship that's no longer serving us?
That's a tough situation to be in, and it's one that many people can relate to. The scholars suggest that in those cases, it might be necessary to make some difficult choices, to step away from roles that are no longer nourishing our souls, and to seek out those that are more aligned with our deepest values and aspirations.
So it's not about blindly accepting whatever roles life throws our way. It's about actively choosing those that allow us to express our authentic selves and contribute our unique gifts to the world.
Precisely. And they point out that this process of choosing, refining, and even transforming our roles is an ongoing one. It's not a one-time decision, but a continual dance of aligning our actions with our evolving understanding of ourselves and our purpose.
This really speaks to me. It's like we're constantly recalibrating that compass, making sure we're heading in a direction that feels both authentic and fulfilling.
Exactly. And the scholars remind us that this journey isn't always easy. There will be times when we feel lost, uncertain, or even discouraged. But that's all part of the process. It's often in those moments of struggle and doubt that we make the greatest discoveries about ourselves and our place in the world.
That's a powerful reminder. It's like we're being invited to embrace the entire journey, the highs and the lows, the triumphs and the setbacks, as opportunities for growth and transformation.
Beautifully said. And it highlights the wisdom of approaching this journey with a spirit of humility, curiosity, and a willingness to learn and grow.
Absolutely. It's a process of unfolding, uncovering new layers of understanding as we go.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the themes that really stuck with me was Saadi's take on leadership and power.
Oh, that's interesting. You wouldn't think a poet and scholar would have much to say about leadership, would you?
You might be surprised. The scholars actually argue that Saadi's insights are really relevant for anyone who's in a position of influence, whether it's at home, at work, in the community.
Okay, now I'm curious. What kind of leadership qualities did he focus on?
Well, he really emphasized things like justice, humility, compassion. Those were the hallmarks of true leadership for him.
Those aren't exactly the qualities that come to mind when you think of a powerful leader, are they?
You're right. Our culture tends to value a very different style of leadership. You know, one that's more about dominance, control, getting results no matter what.
Right. But Saadi challenges that. He suggests that real leadership is about serving others, building trust, and working towards a more just and harmonious society.
So it's less about having power over others and more about empowering those around you.
Exactly. Dr. Dinani even points to a passage in the Gulistan where Saadi writes, "A true king is one who serves his people, not one who is served by them."
Wow, what a powerful statement. It really flips the script on how we usually think about leadership.
Yeah.
But let's be real. Is it actually possible to be a compassionate and just leader in a world that often feels so driven by self-interest and competition?
It's definitely a challenge. But the scholars believe that Saadi's teachings can help us navigate those difficult waters. They point to his focus on self-awareness, ethical behavior, and really understanding human nature. Those are key qualities for anyone in a position of power.
So it's about leading with integrity, compassion, and a deep understanding of the human condition.
Exactly. And they emphasize that this kind of leadership isn't about being weak or naive. It actually takes a lot of strength, courage, and a willingness to make tough decisions for the greater good.
That's really inspiring. It's like Saadi's offering us a vision of a more humane and ethical way to lead, one that's rooted in wisdom, compassion, and a commitment to justice.
Beautifully said. And I think that's one of the most valuable things about his work. It offers this timeless wisdom that's both inspiring and practical. It challenges us to become better people while also giving us guidance on how to actually navigate the complexities of the world.
This has been such an eye-opening exploration of Saadi's work. We've only just scratched the surface, but it's clear that his wisdom is incredibly relevant for our lives today.
Absolutely. It's like we've been on this amazing journey exploring the heart and mind of a master, learning about human nature, the power of language, and how to live a life that's both meaningful and fulfilling.
And you know, what's really striking is how Saadi's message of balance seems to weave its way through every theme we've talked about today. Balancing our inner and outer worlds, our roles and our true selves, even our own light and shadow.
It's true. Balance seems to be the golden thread that connects all of the different aspects of his wisdom.
And as we wrap up this episode 45 of our exploration of Marfat, I can't help but feel a sense of gratitude for all of the insights that Saadi shared with us. His work invites us to keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep diving deeper into ourselves and our connection to something larger than ourselves.
Beautifully said. And for our listeners who are eager to continue this journey, I highly encourage you to delve into Saadi's works directly. His poetry and prose offer an incredible source of wisdom and inspiration that can help us navigate the challenges of life and discover the beauty and meaning that's all around us.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the wisdom of Saadi.
We hope you found some valuable insights and inspiration to carry with you on your own journey. Until next time, keep seeking, keep wondering, and keep your hearts open to the beauty and wisdom that's all around us.